Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit, the podcast where your passion meets action. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast, or if you're new here, welcome. Today, I'm here with Nicole from Canada Helps and Sam from Apathy Is Boring. I'm really excited to have them share all their amazing tips today. I'll have them introduce themselves. Hi, Nicole.
Hello, Maria.
Nicole, tell us about yourself. What do you do?
I am the Senior Manager of Strategic Communications and Brand at Canada Helps. I've been with the team for almost 9 years full time and seen the organization grow a lot. When I started, we were a team of 20. Now we're 100, and we are Canada's largest online donation and fundraising platform.
And what about you, Sam?
Hi, Maria. Thanks for having me. My name is Sam Roosh. I'm the Executive Director of Apathy Is Boring. I've been with the organization for about 8 years now. I have a background in program evaluations and impact measurement, so that's how I come to this work. I've been the Executive Director for the last 4 years. What we do is work to get young people more politically engaged in our democracy.
Nicole approached me about doing this podcast episode, which I was like, okay, let's talk it out and see how it would shake out. But I'm really interested in hearing about how the two of you know each other.
Sam and I met a little while ago. I've always loved and admired the work that Apathy Is Boring does. So I've been a cheerleader and a fan from a distance. We got connected around the time when Canada Helps was launching our giving report earlier this year in April 2024. The theme of the report was all around community connections, and Apathy Is Boring is all about bringing young people together.
Yeah, Canada Helps is ubiquitous if you're a charity in Canada. We're on the platform, and it's such a great tool for particularly smaller nonprofits that don't have access to their own donation system. It makes life so much easier. When they contacted me to participate in the giving report and to share some of our insights on particularly how young people are feeling about the philanthropic space and how they're engaging in giving and in volunteerism, I was thrilled to participate. The report was so insightful. I'm happy I was able to contribute and, of course, get to spend time with Nicole as well.
And Nicole, how is the report created? Is it only using Canada Helps data? Do you aggregate external data sources? Just tell us a little bit about that.
It takes a team to put that annual report together year after year, and it is an aggregation of a variety of different sources. Canada Helps data, and we have donation data from thousands of Canadians who make donations on our platform every year. We also use CRA data, and then we conducted a survey that asked Canadians a little bit more about their giving behavior and what they believe when it comes to their support for environment causes, for example, or other sorts of giving behaviors. So the layering in of all those data points really is what the giving report includes and how we come to it. And of course, we also work with Imagine Canada to help clean up some of the data, along with our partners at Environics Analytics, because they provide a lot of analysis when it comes to who is giving and more in-depth analysis of those giving trends. We've been working with them for several years and put together a bit of a behemoth report every single year.
And what have the trends been showing us overall in the sector? Fundraisers are always hearing like there's less donors and the generational wealth transfer and like these things, but I don't know, sometimes you kind of worry that they're hearsay. Like when I hear donor fatigue, I am gonna die. Like I hear it from a board member all the time. I'm like, well, our donors are giving more than ever. The fundraising that we're doing is actually more effective. So I don't know how much of that is like hearsay, how much of it is like being under resourced as a small nonprofit and just not having a fundraiser or a leadership team. I'd love to hear about the trends that you've seen over the years, and then maybe we could dive into this year particularly.
There's a lot I can say. Depends on how much time you have, Maria. But at a very high level, one of the things that we've reported on at Canada Helps year after year is, and it's really highlighted in CRA data that was circulated every year when that data is published, but fewer Canadians are giving. When we look at the number of Canadians who were claiming charitable tax receipts on their income tax in 2010, that number was 23.4% of Canadians. And then when you flash forward 11 years later, that number drops to 17.7% in 2021. Not all Canadians use their tax credits for their charitable donations on their income tax, but it is one marker measuring this trend over time. Generally speaking, we have seen fewer Canadians give. Now, luckily, the brighter spot is Canadians who have been giving for the last couple of years in particular. They have been giving larger donation amounts. But it depends on the charity and the cause. One organization may be seeing fewer Canadians are giving, and the Canadians who are continuing to give have been giving a smaller donation amount. And then for other organizations, they also may be seeing that fewer Canadians have been giving, but those individuals who are continuing to make those donations have been making those larger donation amounts. There are bright spots, though. For example, monthly giving has been growing quite a bit at Canada Helps. It grew 11% last year. We've really been pleased to see that because monthly giving is so sticky and is so important for sustainable funding for organizations. And also donations of securities have been booming in terms of their growth, rising 32% in 2023. It really highlighted the fact that when Canadians said and reported that they have more close connections, I believe it's 6 or more close connections, whether it's family or friends or other people in their lives that they feel really close to, those individuals give at higher rates than Canadians who say, I actually have very few close connections in my life. So it's this really interesting trend where we're seeing that perhaps it's a matter of feeling connected to their community and wanting to make that donation, for example, or volunteer. But it's really interesting, especially in this time of hyper disconnection, polarization, and isolation, that I think charities need to keep in mind.
Sam, was there anything that surprised you about this year's giving report? I know that you have done kind of a deep dive on it, and just like hearing the loneliness and community, like lack of a community, has been really interesting for me in seeing how that has impacted giving, because it definitely makes sense logically, but it's hard for me to think of like how nonprofits would approach solving that. So I wonder, what was your take on the report this year?
Yeah, I think that was really illuminating, but not surprising in that to see it in black and white, it makes a lot of sense. We've seen a lot of disconnect among young people. In particular, it's been on the rise. And then I think it really accelerated during and post COVID. I think we hear that so often. And I think one of the things that is interesting about this report is giving is a form of civic engagement. It's a way of sharing your time, talent, or treasures. When you look at it in that broader framework, you've got the treasures, the giving, the philanthropic contributions that citizens can make to issues they care about. I think the same trends are applying in the other areas, and that young people aren't volunteering at the same rate. And I think part of that comes from not really knowing how to get involved or if their involvement will have any impact or what that looks like. And so I think there's a bit of a re-education process and extra engagement that nonprofits and charities have to do to engage their networks and show them how their contributions actually do make a meaningful impact. And I say all of that with the caveat that a lot of us are already overburdened and under-resourced in so many ways. So that extra resource to go towards cultivating a strong membership or a strong network is extra work, right? But at the end of the day, I think if you're able to create a sense of community, you see that yield so many more returns. One of the things that I thought was most striking is that we rarely see consensus in our polling. Young people are very diverse, have a lot of different ideas about or theories of change, about how change happens, how they can be involved in it, that kind of thing. But 95% of young people feel it's important to be a good citizen. And I think if you're able to create an environment where people feel that their engagement aligns with that value of wanting to contribute, and they don't just define citizen, to be clear, as like turning up at the ballot box or engaging in formal politics. They really look at it more broadly when we dive into the data. They want to feel that they're contributing to something. And I think that's where we've lost some of that social infrastructure that allows people to see, when I do this, that happens. I think that's being reflected in this case with the giving report in terms of People who already feel or already have that infrastructure are so much more likely to say, hey, yeah, when I do this, this happens, versus people who feel much more isolated and disconnected, where they don't really know or they're not able to see what the impact of their contribution is. And so I think that has far reaching effects. And I think it was so fascinating to see that in the philanthropic space. But I think that's reflected out in volunteerism, in general engagement writ large. And we're definitely seeing that in our programs and have shifted over the years to try and cultivate a much broader, more transparent, trying to make it less opaque. Like, when you do this, things happen. And what are those things? And how can you measure those and understand those? And when we're able to do that, we see that in our programs, we have almost 100% rate of people saying after they leave our programs that they feel that they have the power to make a difference. It is possible when you make these systems visible to people, that they understand what role they play in them. But we're sort of on our back foot because a lot of people don't even see those systems. They're not part of those systems. So how are they going to measure their own impact? And I think that's part of the challenge that we see for sure.
I think that perspective of young people is really interesting because they're doing a lot of community building themselves online, like on TikTok. Like, there's a lot of communities, and like, they really rally around stories there in like multi-part. They're putting so much attention and engagement there. How can you translate that into other ways that would be beneficial for the nonprofit? Although I think people are sleeping on TikTok, to be honest, because I feel like that would be a great way to build that kind of advocacy for sure. But I wanted to ask you both a question. We know people who feel less community give less, right? Is this impacted by the wealth gap? Is there a discrepancy we can point to if we look at hey versus now? People are having less access to funds, so they can't give as much. They have to work multiple jobs, so they can't volunteer as much. So is that part of this trend? Are people turning to other forms of peer support like mutual aid and like watching each other's kids or whatever it is that wouldn't be captured in this report? I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on that.
I think the short answer, Maria, is in terms of that CRA data that we have in terms of how many Canadians are claiming a charitable tax receipt, that completely misses any sort of form of mutual aid, as you just mentioned. I don't think we can say that Canadians are less generous, but in terms of those financial dollars that are so important for charities in order to do what they need to do, that is what we're pointing to, that we're seeing fewer Canadians give to those traditional organizations, but it doesn't mean that Canadians are less generous. That's for sure. Um, and there's multiple ways that Canadians can be involved in their communities. Isolation and disconnection and polarization is up to an individual charity to solve, quote unquote. That is, I would dare I say, impossible for an individual charity to do. But we wanted to talk about it in the report to provide that greater context. This is the ecosystem that charities are operating in, and we can't close our eyes to it, so to speak. So we can certainly, and Sam mentioned this, that charities are so busy and stretched in terms of actually performing the work, the programs and services that they're doing, that to add this layer of community building is potentially extra work for the organization. But the thing that we want to highlight is the fact that when cultivating donors or supporters, how can you get those community activations and build that community? It doesn't need to be an extra project, but it can be built into the work that you're already doing in terms of bringing people together and seeing that impact and building that community to focus on supporting whatever initiative you are doing. And we've been through 2+ years of really challenging times for many Canadians who have been really hit hard in terms of their pocketbook. We have seen that in some of our data in terms of more Canadians turning to charities for essential services like food and shelter, and then also individuals who used to give not being able to give as much or at all in a financial way to a charity that they care about. We don't have data comparing it to the 2008 recession, for example, but it's certainly in that broader context something that we can't lose sight of.
Yeah, and I'll just say, it's interesting that we're talking about this week. We have a newsletter that comes out weekly, The Feed. The Feed does a bite-sized rundown of Canadian politics every week. We designed it to fill the gap after Meta stopped posting news or allowing for news links, but we've been doing it for I think almost 5 years now. In this week's issue of The Feed, there was an article that we spotlighted that mentioned that there was some new StatsCan data that just came out reporting that what they've been measuring the sort of wealth inequality gap since about 1999, and this is the largest they've seen the gap. So we know that impacts a lot of young people. We know that people are feeling this quite profoundly as people talk about the economy being in recovery and inflation being down. What a lot of people feel and perceive is that their money isn't going as far, and I think that's so important. There's a sense that for young people, they don't have the same opportunities that their parents did. We're talking a lot now. I believe there was an article in the Walrus this month or last month about the largest wealth transfer in Canadian history from baby boomers to millennials, but I'm not seeing that in any tangible way. And as a millennial, and I'm curious if other in my cohort perceive that. But I think by and large, people perceive that resources are scarce after 2 years of inflation. And with the caveat that this is anecdotal, in talking to people I know who work in the private sector, they haven't seen cost of living adjustments in 2 years. So never mind that this might be across sectors. I've noticed it particularly with people I know in the private sector where companies are perceiving scarcity. So they're not giving raises. So people are even doing the same job and making less money than they were like dollar when you account for inflation a couple of years ago. So I think that all of these dynamics lead to the scarcity mentality. That is such a systemic problem. That's not something that a charity, to your point, Nicole, is going to solve. And we can create these great environments for the people that we engage with. We can do the best that we can. But some of these challenges are so systemic in nature and they replicate themselves to the point where people are feeling that squeeze. And that sort of sense of something needs to change can be really generative. It can lead to people to come up with really good solutions. As someone who's a democracy advocate, it can also lead to sentiments that pull us away from democracy, make us feel more isolated, make us feel more inclined towards politics and towards ideas that are not pro-social. And so I think we have to be mindful of all of these dynamics. Young people feel that in a very profound way.
It's hard not to get empathetic, right?
Yes.
So I'd love to hear kind of, Sam, how your organization is approaching all this. So I love the newsletter idea. That's a great one because you saw a problem that was going to be affecting a whole bunch of your community members and took steps to address it in a way that also grew your email list, which is very smart. So just wondering like other ways that you build community or push people away from apathy.
So I think that part of the unique nature of our work is that we are a youth-led organization. And so really understanding, okay, where are young people at right now? What are the issues that they care about? Making sure we have a pulse on that. And then also trying to connect them with the institutions and again, make those institutions visible as to who has control over this issue that you care about. In the time that I've been doing this work, those issues have shifted dramatically. Pre-COVID, pre-economic uncertainty, the issues were a lot more broad. So you had Indigenous reconciliation, climate change, these bigger challenges that young people were really interested in engaging with. And it's not to say that those issues aren't still important. I think if you ask a lot of young people, they would say, absolutely, I want to see movement on all of these issues. But now when we poll young people, the top issues are economic. So housing affordability, lower taxes, interestingly, is the top one. The healthcare, I've never seen that. Like healthcare being a top issue for young people is very interesting. So when you start to get into these pocketbook issues, good jobs, fair wages, it starts to shift a little bit. Again, which institutions are we looking at? How are we communicating that? And how are we helping young people see where they should be looking for decision making? But I think by and large, it's a challenge that's ongoing. And so we attack it in a number of ways as an organization. We have the feed. We're hoping just keeps people informed in a media environment that is often very US centric. Our media ecosystem in Canada is shrinking rapidly. If you're plugged in, many of us probably see online, a lot of the major news organizations do rounds of layoffs and we see the deterioration of even jobs in that sector. So the reporting follows and local reporting is not. what it used to be, certainly. And then we also do smaller initiatives that are lower barrier. We have our table topics initiative, which has been running for years in various incarnations as we took it through COVID. But now we've reached a point where we're actually training young people to run their own dinner time conversations effectively. People come together around food and talk about the issues they care about. They talk about their communities, the challenges they see, and then they talk about solutions. And just the idea of coming together and creating space, and as we say, removing the taboo of politics at the dinner table, we're able to see how young people want more. And so it's, how do we create those initial opportunities? How do we get you to cast your first ballot? What information do you need? How can we make you feel valued as a citizen? How can we help you reclaim your role in our democracy and understand that democracy is power of the people and you are the people? So what does that look like? While also acknowledging that being in this very dynamic space, we are operating in a world where we have a public inquiry on foreign interference right now. We have people talking about the opacity and the challenges with nomination races. So we tell young people, run for office. What happens when they actually try? So what are the systems level changes that need to happen for young people to actually go into those roles if they want to? And I think that's where some of that mistrust comes from. It's, yeah, okay, I could go try and run for office, but who knows if I'll be nominated? I can go and try and advocate with my MP, but what if I'm not someone that they care to speak to? What happens if I talk to my MP? And this is a real story. I had someone that I knew who tried to speak about electoral reform with an MP, and they said, "Do you have a master's degree in this?" Like, just the level of dismissiveness they were met with, when almost 3/4 of young people in Canada think we need a new system. And so, like, these kinds of disconnects can feel insurmountable. How are we creating community support so that young people can start to chip away at some of these bigger issues? The system needs a shakeup. We need to modernize our democracy so that people can have influence that will have longer term effects if we're able to make those changes.
I think that I saw a study a few years ago about how younger generations were feeling a lot of nihilism and feeling a lot of hopelessness when it came to their future. So, like, we have climate change, we have economic instability, X, Y, and Z. And that for me immediately triggers a reaction of freeze. I don't know what to do, right? So, fight, flight, or freeze, right? It's that freeze emotion. I think when you're giving so many different ways for people to get involved and see themselves in what they could be doing to build community, to see the impact that they want. It doesn't have to be a donation. It could be X, Y, and Z program. It could be staying involved with the news, reading the things. I think would help really ease that freeze feeling, and getting to that first yes, then builds on that momentum.
Yeah, and I will say we live in a democracy, and you're not going to get everything that you want. That's the reality. Democracy is the best system we've come up with. It's like the hardware of our system, and the operating system is the way we exercise it. We can change that software to make it more accessible. But the system of democracy itself, the idea that people will govern themselves, it's a miracle. It's the best way we found to have peace. You don't have rival factions warring. You have people in the House of Commons. Sometimes it looks like that, but that's the way our system is structured. It's meant for disagreement. It's meant to broker solutions from people who have wildly different points of view. And so I think sometimes that gets a little bit lost. The way that you make change in a democracy is you persuade other people. And the best way to do that is to have a fair playing field. What changes need to happen in that operating system? We know there's parts of our democracy that are not fair. And certainly historically, but even today, people cannot access certain aspects of that system. And I think that's what needs to change. It's not the idea that the people governing is the problem. The idea is that how we're deciding, making those decisions, how we're brokering the wildly disparate ideas of 40 million people. That's crazy. Have you ever tried to even pick a movie with a group of 10 friends? It's a miracle that we're able to do it. So I think making sure that we know that system can work, but also making sure that we need to steward that system and make sure that it's fair, that there's an even playing field for all those ideas to be brokered, I think gets lost sometimes. And that's where these principles come in around, yeah, we live in a pluralistic society where people have different ideas. We have different political parties that represent them. Like all these pieces come together. And that's what I don't want to get lost. And that's where that nihilism scares me as someone who is a democracy advocate, because I'm like, no, if our system is producing that, that's a problem. That's an operating system problem. And that's something that we can work on. So for me, I'm like, hey, you think the system's not fair? Cool. Let's work on that. We have the tools within this system to make it better. So what does that look like? And I hope that's energizing for people. Democracy isn't always the sexiest cause, but it's also so critical to making sure that we're able to have that proper brokerage between ideas, that hopefully the good ideas rise to the top when all things being equal. But I don't think all things are equal. And that's part of the issue.
So Nicole shared a little bit about people are giving less because they feel less connected. Sam, you have a lot of tips on how you have been able to do that in your organization. I'm wondering what you both think the listeners of this episode can take away and put in place in their own organization. What are the first few steps if they are getting started, or what can they do to build that community? What can they take away to improve their own donations and engagement in their community?
I don't think there is one answer for any organization. And I think it's a lot of trying things and seeing how people react. The other thing the one thing I want to mention is bringing it back to the fundraising space for a moment. Giving Tuesday, I think, is sometimes there's a lot of skeptics around Giving Tuesday around, oh, it's shifting money around. And maybe people gave on Giving Tuesday and they would have given perhaps later in December for a holiday campaign. But one of the things that's really beautiful about Giving Tuesday and shown in the data and research behind it is the fact that it really attracts younger Canadians to give. We have a lot of data at Canada Helps to really highlight the fact that there's these newer donors who are really activated by the fact that, wow, there's a day where we all can take action together about a cause that we care about. And they really like that sense of community behind this idea of Giving Tuesday. And then on top of that, there's some data, now granted it is based out of the US, where individuals around Giving Tuesday love it because they feel like they're part of something that's so much bigger than just themselves. She's collecting clothes for her local shelter. I'm collecting cans for my local food bank. You choose what you want to do, but we're all doing something, right? We could celebrate it, participate in it. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel and invent another program for your organization. It is trying to understand what are the things that your team is already doing to establish that sense of community building into the work. And perhaps I would suggest to any charity, when was the last time you've had a conversation with a donor, for example? I've heard of some organizations that on Giving Tuesday, instead of asking donors for money, they actually call them just to thank them and talk about some of the challenges that their organization is facing, and perhaps talking about their holiday goal for the month of December, for example, and really having that conversation and leveling out with that supporter to say, hey, like, we know you care about our cause. How can you give your time, talent, and treasure, as Sam mentioned earlier, to support our cause, right? So I think I would say take a look around at what you already have. Look at all the touch points that you have with supporters to say thank you and really bring them in sometimes low touch ways. And then, of course, asking for that donation is important. The last thing I'll mention is I personally love getting emails from organizations like political, nonprofit, corporate, because I like to see how people are making that ask and engaging subscribers. Take a look at how many times you ask supporters to do something other than give in your newsletter. It could be sharing information, but I've received emails asking me to participate in phone banking, for example, or sign a petition, for example, or very specifically amplify this blog post about this disaster. These are hidden news stories, and you can use your voice to make sure your friends and family know what's going on in the world. Just take a look around at the end of the day, I think, and try to figure out, how do we pepper all these things in, because it feels so overwhelming if you really say, how are we going to completely change the whole system all at once. You need to have that incremental change at the end of the day.
I think one of the things that's so cool about Giving Tuesday is it's become such a cornerstone for so many of us, but it's a really good story. It's a direct response to a perception of greed and excess. It's right after Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Like it's a direct response to this sort of excess of our world. And I think that's also really appealing to people to feel like, okay, we're getting so caught up in getting the cheapest TV or whatever it is that we're looking for. Everyone loves the cheaper TV, but at the end of the day, there's a good story there. And I think that's part of what people connect into. And I think in so many ways, that's part of what it takes to engage your membership or engage your donors. What is the story that you're telling? And how are they a part of it?
I just had this conversation yesterday with a charity that I've supported with very small donations in the past. They were asking about their holiday campaign this year. One of the messages that they were wanting to include in their holiday campaign was sort of acknowledging that they've been much quieter this year because they've been trying to do a lot of fundraising to get the foundation of the organization stabilized. And they said, like, how would you react if that was in an email in terms of an ask for a fundraising donation? And just anecdotally, I'm in the space, so I'm pretty used to this. I said, I think that's fine. People need to know transparently what are your challenges, because if I don't know what your challenges are, I can't help you, right? So I think having that sense of transparency with your supporters is really key because it invites help and it moves your relationship with your donors beyond an open wallet, which is not the right way to engage your donors. You need to have that sort of relationship with them at the end of the day where you're leveling with them. So I said to that organization, put it in and be transparent. Obviously, there is that fine line, right? And you may get one or two comments from individuals saying, like, what's this? They may want to have that conversation. I said, invite that in and invite those conversations. The other thing I suggested was like putting the email, submit questions to the leadership team at the organization. And it gives the leadership team an opportunity to write back and answer some of those questions and have that dynamic relationship.
That's a really fun example. Thank you both for being so giving of your time and your efforts and your insight to the small nonprofit podcast community. If people want to continue the conversation, where can they find you?
I am not great at social media myself, though I would encourage you to follow at Apathy Is Boring for all the updates and subscribe to the feed, please, which you can find at our website, apathyisboring.com. If you want to reach me directly, you can email me. My email is samantha@apathyisboring.com. We're actually turning 20 this year, so that's big news. And we're going to be hosting a fundraiser in Montreal on November 7th. And a daytime event, which is free to showcase our alumni and some of the ways that we work. If you're interested, you can also find that on our website in the 20th anniversary section. And we are also accepting donations as part of that campaign. If you're interested in contributing to our work, you can reach me, Samantha@apathyisboring.com.
Listeners can follow Canada Helps on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Subscribe to our newsletter at Canada Helps. I'm on LinkedIn, and individuals can email me, I should say, at nicoled@canadahelps.org. Hopefully, Maria, maybe we can put that in the show notes. Canada Helps is actually turning 25 next year. So we really encourage listeners to follow along because we're going to have some really exciting stuff coming out. Can't really share more than that, so it's just going to have to be a tease, but we're really excited to celebrate 25 years and have raised more than $3 billion in that time. So I can only imagine how much more we'll be raising this holiday season and beyond. We really encourage Canadians to get involved and get in touch.
Thank you both for being on this episode. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in to another episode. I hope that you got a lot out of this. It was really interesting to hear about the data that Canada Helps is coming out with around community and the power of community in relation to giving, and the examples that Sam gave when it came to how Apathy Is Boring is tackling those challenges. So I hope you're able to apply some of those tips to your organization, whether it's mobilizing your community or your donors. I'm sure you'll find something really good here. Thank you again for tuning in. And as always, if you want to see our lovely faces, you can see this episode on YouTube. We'll see you there. Until next time, bye for now. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Small Nonprofit. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with our guests directly or find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep moving money to mission and prioritizing our well-being. Bye for now.